So this video is going to be mostly about the Ivy generator. I used this before in Bryce 5, but it's a while since I used it, and so I thought I'd have another go with it. To find it, I typed Ivy generator into Google, and there's this link here, an Ivy generator. I followed that and scrolled down a bit, looked at the nice images, and then I picked out this one here, Ivy generator Win32 1.3 RAR file, and downloaded that. And I also downloaded this textured file. And then for the Ivy generator itself, I unpacked it, and in the bin folder here there's the application, so I created a shortcut to that on my desktop so I could get it to run the application. And the textures I just put somewhere handy because I knew I was going to need them. Now I've had an experiment with this to remind myself how it works, or how I think it works, so we'll just get straight into it and see what happens. Right, here I'm in Bryce, default setup, camera facing what I call north. I'm going to get rid of this infinite plane for now, and I'm just going to create a torus. I'm going to edit that torus to make it a bit thinner. I'm going to create a cube. I'm going to enlarge that cube, squash it a bit, shrink it a bit, just to get it so it's like sort of intersecting with the torus. And then I'm going to select the torus and the cube together, modify their attributes, make them positive, and then group them, and then convert them to a mesh, because I need a mesh to work with the Ivy generator program. This is what it's going to put the Ivy over. So now I've got this converted and selected. I'll go edit, export object, and it needs to be exported in OBJ format. So there we go. So it's mesh1 OBJ. So that's exported now. I don't need this as a mesh in Bryce, so I can press Ctrl Z and Ctrl Z. That one groups them. I'll select the cube and I'll just squash it. Oh, not that way. I want to squash it not on y-axis, if I can find the right control there, so it's nice and flat, and then convert it to an infinite plane. So there we've got my torus in an infinite plane, and I'll just move the camera around because we're going to have to position the Ivy on it when we've made it. So that's my Bryce scene ready to receive my Ivy object. I'll just launch the Ivy generator, and then I'll maximize it, and I'm going to import the mesh that I just made in Bryce. It throws up a little error now because it can't import the textures, but that doesn't matter. We don't need the textures, only the geometry. So now you see this is the mesh that I made, the torus and this plane. If I hold the right mouse button down, I can zoom in and out, and the left button allows me to move my camera view. To create a spawn point for the Ivy, I double click somewhere on the mesh, and then I can grow it. Now you see it grows quite quickly on my machine, but you must be aware that this could be a very big object for Bryce to deal with, so don't get carried away on your first experiments. Just click on grow there to stop it growing again. That's going to be too much probably, so just click somewhere else and it just resets your situation. Try again, and you can have a few goes at this. Is quite interesting to see what happens. Don't let it go too far on your first go. So suppose you like that setup. For the sake of argument, there's some sliders here to alter the way things work. What I've noticed is, probability wise, they operate in the opposite direction than I thought was intuitive. But before you can export this, you need to do birth, and then that'll cover it in leaves too. These controls you can modify again, so you don't need to regenerate the whole thing. If you want less leaves or bigger leaves, so let's say leaf probability, if you make the leaf probability very low, you end up with more leaves, which seems odd. If you make it 1, you end up with no leaves, or very few. There's few in there. So I'm gonna go for a very low leaf probability because I know these are going to slow Bryce down, because they're going to use transparencies on the textures. So that's my leaves. You can alter these other settings as well, but I think that's fairly apparent. The main thing to do is to get this back into Bryce and not to have the thing crash. So you've grown it, you've had a few goes at it, you birthed it. It must be birthed before you can export it. So now export, this will be the Ivy. So I'll just call that Ivy, and then we'll go back into Bryce and then go File, Import Object, and then go and look for the one called Ivy that I've just saved, and then check. And at this point, once it's imported, that may take longer if it's a more complex object, bear in mind. it needs its textures. So that's the point at which, remember the texture file that I said I'd downloaded from the website, you need to search for where you've saved that. So I'll go OK. As it happens, I just got it just here. I'll get textures, and it's looking for a file that's in here, so I'll just go OK for now, and that's brought in my ivy. Now, it's not correctly orientated with the objects that spawned it because it's its own object group, so you need to try and line it back up with the objects in your scene. So I'm using the wireframe view just to do that, and try and figure out how it's going to fit around this object, and also going to have to meddle with the textures a bit. Now, the advantage of using a torus in your scene is you can edit that and make it a bit thinner still, so that it's less likely to interfere with the ivy object. And then as you can see, the textures don't look quite right because they're all on like flat cards, these leaves. So you need to identify which one of the leaves. So ivy one's the whole thing. You can ungroup it to go and then pick out the individual components. So this one here, if I look in here, that's a leaf. And to modify this material, you need to go transparent there and blend transparency. You can do more sophisticated things with leaf transparency. If you have a look at Rashad Carter's tutorials for that, you can get some very nice effects. But I'm not going to go there. We're just concentrating on getting the object in now. Let's see what ivy 3 is. That looks like the branches. That's okay. I don't need to modify that one. And ivy 2, that's leaves again, so it's just a case of make it transparent by putting the blob in there so it obeys this alpha map, and then blend transparency. There are some more textures like bump maps and that in that textures folder that you download separately that you can apply with your knowledge of materials. But as I say, for now it's just a matter of creating the shape and getting it back into Bryce. So I didn't want to make this too drawn out a tutorial, because I suppose most people will know how to handle the texture sides of it. It's just getting the software to interact. So that's your ivy in Bryce. Now, the things to be aware of is that each one of these leaves has got a transparency around it because we just set it, and that will be quite punishing for the Bryce render engine. So you don't be surprised if when you add a lot of this ivy stuff into your scene, it might cause the render to really slow down, and that's the reason, the transparencies. If you wanted to render a lot faster, reduce the number of leaves. That's the answer to that. And otherwise, just experiment with it and see what you can come up with. So it's a nice little bit of software, works quite quickly on modern computers, but be aware you might have trouble if you export very large files into and the import and the export will take a long time, and you don't get very much of a feedback from it when you're loading them in, so you just might have to sit and wait and wonder if it's crashed for a while. Okay then, well, I suppose that's about it. The only thing left to do is apply some nice lighting onto this object, see how it looks.